First response. Dr. Sarah Chen hadn't expected to make history on a Tuesday morning. She was in the middle of calibrating the quantum scanner when the proximity alerts lit up her small emergency clinic's displays like a Christmas tree. The facility, perched on asteroid NT-347 at the edge of human space, rarely saw more than a few miners with radiation burns or the occasional tourist with space sickness. The ship that dropped out of hyperspace was unlike anything she'd seen before, obsidian black, bristling with weapons, and easily twice the size of the largest human vessels. Its hull bore the distinctive scarification patterns of the Nexary, a species whose name alone made hardened space captains change course. Dr. Chen, her AI assistant medic chirped, incoming transmission from the vessel. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a Nexary warrior. Their chitinous exoskeleton gleamed like polished onyx, and 4 sets of compound eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. But Sarah noticed something else, the way they held their upper limbs close to their thorax, a sign of distress in most insectoid species. Human healer, the warrior's translator rendered their clicks and chirps into English. We require assistance. The last word seemed to cause physical pain. This is Dr. Chen. What's the nature of your medical emergency? Our War Master. Internal bleeding. Our medicinals are not sufficient. Sarah's mind raced. The Nexary were notorious for their biological autonomy, their bodies could synthesize most medicines they needed, and they considered accepting outside medical help a sign of weakness. For them to seek human aid. Send me their vitals, she ordered, professional training taking over. Medic, prepare the xenosurgical suite. And warm up the synthetic hemolymph stocks. The data that scrolled across her screen made her breath catch. The War Master's readings were critical, multiple internal ruptures, severe hemolymph loss, and signs of organ failure. Whatever had happened to them, they should have been dead hours ago. Permission to dock granted, she transmitted. Bay 2. I'll meet you there. As she rushed to the airlock, Sarah grabbed her emergency kit and the neural translator. The Nexary were fiercely protective of their warriors, she'd heard stories of entire fleets being mobilized over a single injured commander. Now she had their War Master's life in her hands. The docking clamps engaged with a resonant boom that shook the entire clinic. When the airlock cycled open, Sarah found herself face to face with 6 Nexary warriors, each nearly 8 feet tall. They carried between them a hover stretcher bearing the largest Nexary she'd ever seen. The War Master's exoskeleton was cracked in multiple places, iridescent hemolymph seeping through the fissures. Their breathing was labored, secondary respiratory vents working overtime to compensate for the damaged primary ones. What happened? Sarah asked, already scanning the injuries with her diagnostic tool. Quantum mine, one of the warriors responded. Designed to bypass our shields. The War Master protected the fleet. Sarah nodded, leading them to the surgical suite. I need to operate immediately. Your biology is similar enough to other insectoid species that I can dash. No, the lead warrior interrupted. Our medical secrets are sacred. You cannot dash. Then your War Master dies, Sarah stated flatly, meeting all 4 sets of their eyes. I need complete biological access to save them. Your choice. A tense moment passed. Sarah could feel the warriors' agitation, could see their combat reflexes urging them to protect their leader's privacy. But she held firm. Finally, the lead warrior's antennae dipped in acquiescence. Save them, human healer. We will, trust. For the next 6 hours, Sarah worked to repair the quantum damage that had shredded the War Master's internal organs. She discovered that Nexary biology was even more fascinating than xenobiologists had theorized. Their organs could shift position to protect vital systems, and their hemolymph contained nanoscale repair mechanisms unlike anything she'd seen before. When she finally emerged from surgery, exhausted but successful, she found the warriors in exactly the same positions she'd left them in. They hadn't moved a muscle in 6 hours. "The War Master will live," she announced. "They need rest, but their autonomous healing systems are already adapting to the repairs." The warriors' collective relief was palpable. The lead warrior stepped forward, performing a complex gesture Sarah didn't recognize. "You have honored us with your skill, Dr. Chen," they said. "The Nexari do not forget such debts." As she watched them settle their leader into the recovery ward, Sarah realized she had just witnessed something unprecedented, the first time the Nexari had willingly shared their biological secrets with another species. What she didn't know was that this moment would change the course of human-Nexari relations forever. Later that night, as she updated the medical logs, her comms system lit up with multiple incoming signals. Word had spread fast. More Nexari ships were requesting permission to dock, carrying their wounded and sick. The most feared species in known space had decided to trust human medicine, and it had all started with a single doctor who refused to let fear stand in the way of healing. Breaking barriers. The transformation of Dr. Chen's remote clinic happened faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 3 weeks of saving the War Master, her small asteroid facility had become an impromptu Nexari medical center. The originally sparse docking bays now bristled with obsidian ships, their hulls reflecting the distant starlight like black mirrors. "Patient in Bay 4 is refusing the anesthetic again," medic reported as Sarah finished her 3rd surgery of the day. She wiped her brow, leaving a smear of iridescent hemolymph on her forehead. "Let me guess, another warrior caste who thinks pain medication is dishonorable." Affirmative. "They insist their battle meditation will suffice." Sarah had learned more about Nexari physiology and culture in the past 3 weeks than humanity had discovered in 50 years of distant observation. The warrior caste's stubborn adherence to their pain endurance traditions was just one of many challenges she faced daily. She entered Bay 4 to find a younger Nexari warrior, their exoskeleton still showing the pearlescent sheen of adolescence. Their right arm hung at an awkward angle, clearly broken in multiple places. 2 elder warriors flanked the medical bed, their postures radiating disapproval at the human medical equipment. "I understand you're refusing pain management," Sarah said, approaching with her scanner. "But before you make that final decision, there's something you should know about how your species heals." The young warrior's antennae twitched with interest, even as the elders chittered disapprovingly. "Your cellular regeneration is actually more efficient when your pain response isn't flooding your system with stress hormones. Those who accept pain management typically heal 30% faster and return to combat readiness sooner." She watched the internal struggle play across the young warrior's features. Like many Nexari, they were caught between their species' traditional beliefs and the undeniable effectiveness of human medical science. "Perhaps." The warrior clicked hesitantly, "a minimal dose would be acceptable. For optimal healing efficiency." Sarah hid her smile. She'd learned that framing medical treatments in terms of combat effectiveness often helped bridge the cultural gap. As she worked on repairing the warrior's arm, her mind drifted to the encrypted transmission she'd received from Earth Medical Command that morning. They wanted to formalize the unexpected partnership that was developing, to establish proper protocols and procedures for treating Nexari patients. But Sarah knew pushing too fast could shatter the fragile trust that was building. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion in the main corridor. A group of Nexari engineers, recognizable by their more iridescent exoskeletons, were arguing with a maintenance crew about modifications to the clinic's life support systems. "The atmospheric composition is inadequate for proper healing," one engineer insisted, mandibles clicking rapidly. "We must adjust it to match our homeworld's parameters. And risk compromising the environment for other patients," the human technician countered. "We need to find a middle ground." Sarah watched as both sides pulled up atmospheric charts and began working together, pointing out concerns and suggesting solutions. Just a month ago, such cooperation would have been unthinkable. The Nexari were infamous for refusing to share any technical specifications about their environmental needs. Later that evening, as she reviewed patient charts in her office, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. The lead warrior from the War Master's entourage entered, their posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen in a Nexary. "Dr. Chen, we have a request," they said, placing a data crystal on her desk. "These are the medical records from our colony on Nexus Prime. We have young ones there, suffering from a developmental condition our healers cannot address. Would you examine them?" Sarah stared at the crystal in shock. Nexary medical data was more closely guarded than their weapons technology. This level of trust was unprecedented. "Of course," she said, carefully picking up the crystal. "I'll need to consult with some colleagues on Earth, specialists in xenopediatrics. Would that be acceptable?" The warrior's antennae wavered for a moment before steadying. "If you vouch for their discretion, we will trust them as we trust you." As the warrior left, Sarah sat back in her chair, the weight of this responsibility settling on her shoulders. The Nexary weren't just bringing their wounded warriors anymore, they were entrusting her with their children's future. A notification flashed on her screen, more Nexary ships requesting permission to dock. But these weren't warships. They were civilian vessels, carrying families seeking medical care. The fearsome warrior species was revealing a side of themselves no other race had ever seen. "Medic," she called out, "contact Earth Medical Command. Tell them we're going to need a bigger clinic. And, send a message to all human medical schools. We're going to need more doctors who specialize in Nexary physiology." As she looked out her office window at the growing fleet of Nexary ships, Sarah realized she was witnessing more than just a medical partnership. This was the beginning of a profound change in galactic relations, all because humans had proven themselves worthy of trust with the most vulnerable members of the galaxy's most feared species. The plague. The first signs of trouble arrived with a civilian transport from the Nexary colony world of Carthax. Dr. Sarah Chen was reviewing reports in her newly expanded clinic when Medic's voice carried an unusual note of concern. "Dr. Chen, incoming vessel reports multiple patients with symptoms that don't match any known Nexary ailment in our database. The patients arrived in environmental isolation pods, a concerning sight for a species that prided itself on biological resilience." The first thing Sarah noticed was the color of their exoskeletons. Instead of the usual glossy black, they had developed a pale, grayish tinge. More alarming were the microfractures spreading across their carapaces like spider webs. "How many cases on Carthax?" Sarah asked the transport's captain, a civilian Nexary whose own antennae showed signs of the same degradation. 3,000 and growing, they clicked softly. "Our youngest are most affected." Their compound eyes dimmed, the Nexary equivalent of closing one's eyes in pain. "We've lost 17 hatchlings already." Sarah felt her heart sink. In all her time treating the Nexary, she'd never seen them admit to losses so openly. This wasn't just a medical crisis, it was a cultural watershed moment. Within hours, her clinic was receiving reports from other Nexary colonies. The same symptoms were appearing everywhere. Exoskeleton degradation, organ system failures, and an unprecedented mortality rate among the young. "We need to go to Carthax," Sarah announced during an emergency conference call with Earth Medical Command. "We can't properly study this disease from here." "Doctor, the Nexary have never allowed non-military humans into their colonial space," Admiral Hayes reminded her. "The diplomatic implications dash." "With respect, Admiral," Sarah interrupted, "they're watching their children die. I don't think they care about diplomacy right now." As if to prove her point, a priority transmission cut through their conversation. The War Master, the same one whose life Sarah had saved months ago, appeared on screen. Their once imposing form showed subtle signs of the same illness. "Dr. Chen," they clicked, their translator rendering their voice with unusual softness. "We require your presence on Carthax. A vessel will arrive within the hour to transport you and any team you deem necessary." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll need Dr. Patel, our xenobiologist, Dr. Rodriguez, our pediatric specialist, and a full mobile laboratory. Granted, the War Master replied. And, thank you. The journey to Carthax aboard the Nexary vessel was tense. Sarah and her team worked around the clock, studying the preliminary data. The disease appeared to be attacking the very foundation of Nexary biology. Their ability to synthesize their own medicines was failing. When they arrived at Carthax, the sight took their breath away. The normally imposing Nexary architecture, all sharp angles and obsidian surfaces, was covered in quarantine fields. Warriors who usually stood proud now moved with careful, measured steps, their exoskeletons visibly brittle. In the main medical center, Sarah faced a sight that would haunt her, rows upon rows of Nexary young, their tiny forms struggling against the disease. Parent guards stood vigil, their usual stoic demeanor cracking under the weight of helplessness. Our analysis shows the disease is targeting their adaptive immune response, Dr. Patel reported after their first day of testing. It's like their internal pharmacology is being shut down systematically. Sarah watched as a parent guard gently stroked their child's dulling carapace with their antennae, a gesture of comfort she'd never seen them display publicly before. In that moment, she realized something crucial. They're too perfect, she whispered. What? Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his samples. The Nexary evolved to be the perfect biological machines, able to synthesize any compound they need, adapt to any threat. But that very perfection made them vulnerable. They have no redundancies, no messy backup systems like humans do. Sarah turned to her team. We need to make them a little more human. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. They worked on developing a treatment that would introduce controlled imperfections into the Nexary immune system, similar to how human vaccines worked by triggering an immune response. It was completely counter to Nexary biological philosophy, which strived for perfect efficiency. When Sarah presented the solution to the Nexary Medical Council, she expected resistance. Instead, she found acceptance born of desperation. To save our young, the head of the council clicked, we will embrace imperfection. The treatment worked, but it did more than cure the disease. It fundamentally changed how the Nexary saw themselves and their place in the galaxy. Their pursuit of biological perfection had nearly led to their downfall. It was their willingness to accept help, to accept imperfection, that saved them. As Sarah watched the first group of treated children begin to recover, their exoskeletons regaining their proper sheen, she saw a parent guard do something unprecedented. They extended their hand to her in a very human gesture of gratitude. Perhaps, they clicked softly, perfection is not found in isolation, but in connection. The plague had nearly destroyed the Nexary, but in doing so, it had broken down the final barriers between their species and humanity. As news of the cure spread through Nexary space, Sarah realized that the galaxy's most feared species had learned perhaps the most human lesson of all: true strength lies not in standing alone, but in knowing when to reach out for help. Trust under fire. The medical transport Mercy's Grace dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Epsilon sector, its white hull bearing the universal symbol of medical neutrality. Dr. Sarah Chin stood on the bridge, watching the stars resolve from streaks to points of light. After the plague crisis, she'd been appointed head of the newly established Human Nexary Medical Exchange Program, overseeing a fleet of hospital ships that served both species. Multiple ships detected on long-range sensors, announced Captain Rivera. Signatures match Vorkath vessels. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The Vorkath were the Nexary's ancient rivals, a species that viewed the growing cooperation between humans and Nexary as a threat to their dominance. Their ships were approaching fast, too fast for a casual encounter. Status of our patients? Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady. 12 Nexary in critical condition, including 4 juveniles still recovering from the plague's effects, her medical officer reported. The stasis fields are stable, but they won't survive a long-range transport jump in their condition. The comm system crackled. Human vessel, this is Commander Zexlar of the Vorkath Defense Fleet. You are carrying enemies of the Vorkath Imperium. Surrender your patience or be destroyed. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. The Galactic Medical Accord guaranteed the neutrality of all medical vessels, an agreement the Vorkath had signed. But out here, at the edge of civilized space, such treaties were only as strong as the willingness to enforce them. This is Dr. Sarah Chen of the Mercy's Grace. We are a neutral medical vessel protected under Article 7 of the Galactic Medical Accord. Our patients are under our protection. The accord does not apply to Nexari warriors who have attacked Vorkath colonies, Zexlar's harsh voice replied. Surrender them, or we will take them by force. Sarah's mind raced. The Vorkath commander was lying, she knew these patients were civilians. But even if they had been warriors, medical neutrality was absolute. It had to be, or the whole system would collapse. Bridge to medical bay, she called. Begin emergency evacuation procedures. Move all critical patients to the Central Treatment Core. She turned to Captain Rivera. Deploy the emergency shields around the medical section. Dr. Rivera warned, if we power up our shields, they might consider it an act of aggression. If we don't, our patients die. Sarah opened a channel to all hands. This is Dr. Chen. We took an oath to protect all life, regardless of species or circumstance. I intend to honor that oath. Anyone who wishes to evacuate to the escape pods may do so now. Not a single crew member moved. The Vorkath ships drew closer, their weapons visibly charging. Sarah opened one final channel, not to the Vorkath, but on the old emergency frequency she'd used during the plague crisis. This is Dr. Chen of Mercy's Grace to any Nexari vessels in range. We are a medical transport under threat from Vorkath forces. We have civilians aboard, including plague survivors. We request dash. No need to continue, Dr. Chen, a familiar voice clicked through the translator. The space behind her ship suddenly rippled as 3 Nexari warships decloaked. The War Master's flagship took position directly between Mercy's Grace and the Vorkath fleet. These humans, the War Master's voice boomed across all channels, are under our protection. They saved our children when they had no obligation to do so. They risked their lives to cure our plague. If you wish to harm them, you must first go through the entire Nexari battle fleet. More Nexari ships appeared, dropping out of hyperspace in a display of force that made the Vorkath vessels look tiny in comparison. But what struck Sarah wasn't the military might, it was the presence of civilian Nexari ships mixed among the warships, positioning themselves to help shield the medical transport. The Vorkath Imperium does not recognize Dash, Commander Zexlar began. The Vorkath Imperium, the War Master interrupted, will leave. Now. Or discover why even your ancestors feared to provoke us. For a tense moment, Sarah thought the Vorkath would attack anyway. Then, one by one, their ships turned and disappeared into hyperspace. In the aftermath, as Nexari engineering teams helped reinforce Mercy's Grace's medical systems, Sarah found herself in a peculiar conversation with the War Master. You risked your ship, your crew, to protect our patients, she said. Why? The War Master's antennae moved in what she now recognized as their equivalent of a smile. You humans taught us something valuable, Dr. Chen. True strength lies not in standing alone, but in standing together. Your willingness to die protecting our civilians proved that you understand this better than we ever did. It's just what doctors do, Sarah shrugged. No, the War Master clicked softly. It is what friends do. The Vorkath believed they could drive a wedge between our species. Instead, they have proven to the galaxy that humans and Nexari stand as one. As Sarah looked out at the mixed fleet of human and Nexari vessels, she realized that today had marked another turning point. The galaxy's most feared species had not only accepted human medical care, they had risked war to protect it. The bond forged through healing had proven stronger than centuries of isolationism and fear. Perhaps, she said, we should make this arrangement permanent. A joint medical defense fleet. The War Master's compound eyes gleamed. I believe that would be acceptable. The bridge. 5 years after the Vorkath incident, Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the gleaming spires of the newly completed Galactic Medical Academy on New Terra. The massive complex was an architectural marvel, seamlessly blending human and Nexary design philosophies, curved human structures flowing into sharp Nexary angles, all wrapped in a shimmering shield that made the building seem to float between earth and sky. The first class arrives tomorrow, Dr. Rodriguez remarked beside her, now sporting silver hair from years of dedicated service. 200 human students, 150 Nexary apprentice healers. Never thought I'd see the day. Sarah watched as a group of Nexary engineers made final adjustments to the environmental systems. The entire facility could shift between Earth standard and Nexary standard atmospheres within moments, allowing both species to work comfortably in shared spaces. A far cry from the makeshift solutions they'd cobbled together in her old asteroid clinic. War Master on approach, Medic announced, the AI had insisted on following Sarah to her new position as Academy Director. The War Master's personal shuttle descended with characteristic precision, but Sarah noticed something different about it. The formerly pure black hull now bore medical insignia alongside its battle markings, a change that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Director Chen, the War Master clicked warmly as they emerged. Though their exoskeleton showed signs of age, their presence was as commanding as ever. The High Council sends its approval of the final curriculum adjustments. Those adjustments had been the subject of months of careful negotiation. Convincing the Nexary to share their biological secrets with human medical students had been challenging enough. Getting them to accept human medical philosophies in return had been even harder. Walk with me. Sarah gestured toward the Academy's medical gardens, where earth plants grew alongside Nexary medicinal crystals. As they walked, students of both species who had arrived early were practicing emergency response scenarios together. I remember when you first came to my clinic, Sarah said, watching a human student carefully demonstrate proper splint placement on a Nexary's arm. Did you ever imagine it would lead to this? The War Master's antennae twitched in amusement. That day, I was merely hoping to survive. You humans have a way of exceeding expectations. They paused at the center of the garden, where a monument stood, a double helix twisted together with the crystalline structure of Nexary DNA, rendered in gleaming metal. The Council has approved one more change, the War Master announced. Beginning next cycle, all Nexary warships will carry human medical officers. And they hesitated, mandibles clicking softly. We would be honored if human hospitals would accept Nexary combat medics in return. Sarah turned to them in surprise. The Nexary allowing their warriors to serve under human command? That's unprecedented. Many things about our relationship with humans have been unprecedented, the War Master replied. The plague taught us we cannot survive in isolation. The Vorkath showed us the value of true allies. Perhaps it is time we acknowledged that the future belongs to those who can adapt and trust. A commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. A Nexary civilian transport had arrived early, carrying several families. What caught Sarah's eye was a young Nexary, barely past hatchling stage, excitedly pointing out features of the Academy to their human friend, clearly a child from one of the human medical families that had relocated to Nexary worlds. They don't see differences anymore, Sarah observed. To them, this is just normal. As it should be, the War Master clicked. My own grand hatchling speaks of becoming a doctor. Not a Nexary healer, a doctor, in the human tradition. They say humans understand something about healing that we had forgotten. Oh. What's that? That medicine is not just about repairing bodies. It is about connecting with those who suffer, about being present in their moment of need. Humans may lack our biological perfection, but you possess something far more valuable, the ability to heal the spirit as well as the body. As the sun set behind the Academy's spires, Sarah watched more students arrive, humans and Nexary, moving easily among each other as if their species had never been enemies. In the distance, a mixed fleet of medical ships prepared for their next mission, their white hulls bearing both human and Nexary markings. "You know," Sarah said, "when I graduated medical school, they told us our job was to, first, do no harm. I never imagined that principle would help bridge the gap between species." The War Master's compound eyes reflected the fading sunlight. "Perhaps that is why the galaxy needed human doctors. In a universe obsessed with power and perfection, you reminded us of a simple truth, that true strength lies not in the ability to wage war, but in the courage to heal, to trust, and to care for one another." As night fell over the academy, lights came on in laboratories where humans and Nexary would soon work side by side, in lecture halls where ancient medical knowledge would be shared freely, and in dormitories where the next generation of healers would learn that differences in biology need not be barriers to understanding. The galaxy's most feared species had not only learned to trust human doctors, they had learned to become them. And in doing so, they had helped create something unprecedented, a future where healing transcended the boundaries of species and space itself. "Ready for tomorrow?" the War Master asked as they prepared to leave. Sarah looked out at her life's work, not just a building or an institution, but a bridge between worlds. "Always," she smiled. "There's still so much we can learn from each other."